Hello everyone, and welcome to this Nintendo Life episode 207. My name is NBZ, and I'm existing. I'm still here. Life continues, and Bally also exists and is here. Hi Bally, how are you doing?
Hi NBZ, I'm existing and I'm also here,
Yes,
trucking along, playing some games.
Sometimes I just don't know what to say at the start of a show, and so I just start going into a ramble that doesn't really make any sense, but in some senses it makes the most sense because we all live in a state of existential dread these days, especially given that obviously Metroid Dread has come and gone now, and I have been passed over with Dread. And speaking of which, we did do a bonus episode on Metroid Dread, which if you want to check out, that's in the feed now. We had a friend of the show, Devin, come on to chat with us for a good 2 hours or so about everything in Metroid Dread. Big spoiler cast that you can go listen to. So if you have finished the game, go check that out. That was a lot of fun. And Bally, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it on this episode. Definitely. But yes, if you want actual in-depth of every single thing in the game, go check that out. That's already in the feed and on YouTube and all those fun places. And it's got a big spoiler banner on YouTube because I thought, better warn people before they click this thumbnail and think, ooh, that looks like a fun thing to listen to. Be warned, you will be spoiled. But we've got a lot of things going on, a lot of things to talk about on today's show. And before we get into them, however, I also want to give another shout out to stuff that's going on. I have made a thing. Basically, we're getting close to the Game of the Year stuff, and also I had a week off, and I was like, I'm bored. What should I do? I was like, oh, we don't really have written down anywhere in ink or digital ink, if you want to say, for the internet, any of our Game of the Year choices over the years. And we're people who like lists quite a bit, if you haven't noticed, our top 50 games of all time and all that stuff. So I thought that I would put together a profile on the website GG, which is it's kind of like a almost backlog / list website for video games that just presents things really nicely. And I use it for mine and Bally's games that we play every year lists.
It's like when you could see your iTunes library, and it was called iTunes at the time, and it was all the album artwork of all the wonderful music you owned, and you felt proud of it, and it was nice. And then all of a sudden, music became meaningless, and no one owns any music anymore.
Streaming took
it's like
over,
that for games. You can see all the covers nicely arranged of the games that you've listed, which is great.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a little Hall of Fame, basically, of all of our picks, our picks for games that didn't come out that year that were our games of the year, our top 10 lists. And
my opinions have changed on a lot of those lists, but that's how I felt at the time, for sure.
You can see the evolution of Bally happen in real time by looking at his lists, which is good fun. But yeah, we've got our TNL joint lists there as well for every year. So I'll leave a link to that in the description. It's also pinned in our Discord at the top. So if you are wondering for some random reason what our third favorite game of 2017 was, then you can go and check and see if you were right, which is much easier than going through a podcast archive and trying to find a timestamp and listen. And obviously, to be honest with everybody, this is more of a self-indulgent thing for myself more so than anything, but I just thought other people might be interested in it. So if you are interested, then you can go and track and keep a look of the games that we have been ranking over the years, which is good fun. So yeah, link will be in the description, as I mentioned. But let's get into the show, Bally. What are we going to talk about today?
For the first segment, we're going to talk about a little bit of the news that happened with Animal Crossing and that direct. A few things to talk about. Plus, we're going to talk about the games that we've been playing in that first segment. And then for the second segment, we're going to cover lots of your listener emails. Just a 2-segment show today.
Yeah, but yeah, lots. Obviously, we have to get through it in terms of our email backlog, which is great. People have sent stuff in. Continue to send it in, please. That would be fantastic. But yes, we got a lot of cool things to talk about. Let's begin with that aforementioned Animal Crossing Direct that happened, which I totally forgot was happening, and I was doing something totally different at the time. I think I was playing a game or something, and then I went on Twitter and I was like, oh right, that happened. So I quickly went back and caught up on it and had a watch through, and I'll tell you what, I was pretty pleasantly surprised by this thing, if I'm honest. I didn't have huge expectations because they had teased oh, Brewster's coming back. So my expectation was okay, that's it. There's a coffee shop now. Bye. See you later. And just no other updates. But turns out they're adding quite a lot to Animal Crossing New Horizons, to the extent of which I might actually go back into this game and start playing it again, because I certainly have good chunks of my island that are filled out, and I like the way they look, and I'm happy with all of that stuff, but there's still a lot of open space that I never really did much with, as well as just orchards upon orchards of like fruit trees that I never actually ended up using because I had millions of Bell already in the bank from the turnip market. So like I could just renovate that whole space and turn it into something totally different. And Nintendo is certainly giving us a reason to, because they are adding a bunch of things. Is there anything in particular here that stood out to you, Bally, from what they kind of showed in this mini direct thing?
It was kind of so full on and so much stuff that I was just it kind of all merged into one big thing for me, honestly, in my head. But I think that stuff like you kind of go on like visit other islands, and they've done the whole like thing where you can just, it's essentially like turning Animal Crossing more or less into like The Sims, where you're just going to these other places. It's like, it doesn't matter if you've run out of space on your own island, you're going to go to these other islands and start decorating and arranging furniture for all these people and doing jobs for them, kind of thing, which I think is a fun idea.
So we should distinguish actually, because what you're talking about is Happy Home something. It's so Happy Home Designer was a game on the 3DS that was basically an Animal Crossing spin-off that was only about decorating people's houses and not really any other Animal Crossing stuff. This Happy Home Paradise, what it's called, is going to be a paid expansion for Animal Crossing that will also roll into Nintendo Switch Online if you have Nintendo Switch Online. So that's a totally different thing, in fact, from the free update. So there's the free update with 2.0, which adds a bunch of stuff like farming and like cooking meals, and Brewster is there. There's Cap'n who's back, and Cap'n takes you to different islands where you can find gyroids and you can find other resources that they're adding to the game. There's cooking now, so all the stuff that you farm and harvest can then be cooked into meals, and just extra like little quality of life things added. So like if there's a table and a chair and there's a tiny little gap, you can now like scooch between the gap to sit down. Like it just adds things that make life easier, but also little touches to decorations. You can have like walls that are kind of in the middle of rooms, like partition walls, and you can have an accent wall, so you can have the same wallpaper and one of the walls is slightly different to accent it, and also like things on the ceiling, like lamps and things that can hang down like chandeliers. So there's a ton of different stuff that has been added, and it feels like a really full-blown expansion, even though it's just a bunch of free stuff.
Yeah, that's the thing. It was just so much stuff, and as someone who's completely checked out of Animal Crossing, I was like, I should jump back in and give this stuff a go. Like, right. Even if I don't delve deep into all of it, I just want to like experience some of these things, and there's a lot there. Like, I think it's just fun that there's so much to go back to, and I know that they said this is like the final major update, but if you're only going to have one more update, this kind of is the way to do it, right?
Yeah, I think so. And it feels like they could have done a better job of making Animal Crossing a quote-unquote games as service as we understand it in the modern era. And it just seems like Nintendo are just not interested in doing that. They, for whatever reason, have decided, we're just going to do 2 like big bulk updates, and that's kind of it. And we're not going to do anything like almost drip feedy in a sense. Like you could imagine, like every month they do, okay, this month we're adding new hairstyles, this month we're adding this first person camera thing, this month we're expanding your storage, this month we're doing the new fences and those like slight additions, and like they're expanding the number of bridges and stuff you can have, not by much, I should say, from 8 to 10, which I think should be much bigger than that, but whatever. But like it seems they have been saving up for a big blast, and they just kind of like, well, and here is all of it at once. And to some degree that's fun, because it means it's a more direct call to action for people who have fallen off Animal Crossing. Because frankly, if they had done it month by month, it wouldn't have been the one individual burst for me to get interested again. Whereas this is that, and I think that's kind of what their aim is to get people back to the game. And then once they're back in the game, they're like, oh, did you know, by the way, we have this paid expansion that you could pay for if you so wish to, and you can unlock things like partition walls and stuff if you go over to that island that you can then use on your main island, and you can, decorate your own villagers' houses now. So, I think financially and business-wise, they kind of have... a reason.
Nintendo probably have some stats to back that up as well.
I'm sure they do.
Tracks, so I think it will make sense.
I'm actually kind of interested by the gyroids because they look totally different than they used to. They are kind of like smaller and more bite-sized, and you can put them on your little shelves and stuff, and they're not big and take up a bunch of the room, which I enjoyed gyroids back in the day, but I never really put them in my house because they were just a bit weird and they took up a lot of space. So I do like this new approach to them, and you can find different gyroid parts and put them together, and yeah, I think it's a nice approach to that type of thing. But it feels like there's such a higher level of customization going on here, from all the different food that you can make to like just the little extra little like shelving units and accent walls, like
more storage stuff, like really nice stuff like that. There's a lot of quality of life stuff in there that should have been there from the start, but they've added.
Frankly, yes. And to be honest, they still haven't fixed the biggest problem, which is no bulk crafting still. And it's seeming this is the last update. They're never going to put that in the game. So if you want to make fish bait, well, get ready to continue to do that forever and ever, because they're not going to change it, which kind of sucks. But obviously, the one that you mentioned before, the Happy Home Paradise, is a separate thing, which is a part of the Nintendo Switch Online package. And maybe we can kind of talk about that together, because there's been a lot of discourse about the price of the expansion pass, or expansion pack, I should say, for Nintendo Switch Online, which in America it's going from $20 a year up to $50 a year. In the UK it's going from $17.50 up to $35 or $34.99. So for us it's basically a double in price. For people in the US it's a bit more than that. And I think people are just generally annoyed at the amount of stuff Nintendo is giving you for this package versus how much they are charging extra on top of it. And I feel a little different about it, just because I think we're based in the UK and our pricing situation is slightly different. It's not like it's a big difference price-wise, but doubling it, like, to me is like, when I look at 35 quid a year, I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I'm okay with that, given that I want to play the Genesis games. I do care about N64 stuff, and I am someone who owns Animal Crossing and am interested in going back to it. But also, there's a situation here where there are websites that sell codes for Nintendo Switch Online, which I have done, and last year I did to do my upgrade, and I saved another 5 quid on top of it. And there's also the Family Pass, which, if you want to split it between a bunch of people, saves even more money. So for me, like, there are ways around this, and you can access it in much cheaper avenues. And I guess from our perspective, for me, it doesn't. I'm fine paying it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's numerous reasons I think it works for us, especially. Like, A, we co-host a Nintendo podcast. These are lots of Nintendo games. That's totally cool with us. B, I think we're into the habit of buying a lot of big games day one that are often £40-50, and maybe we'd have a short experience with those games and maybe feel a little bit like, oh, that's quite a short experience for £50 worth, whereas this is like, what, £35, and it's like, yeah, but I'm going to get a year's worth of potentially playing some games online with you. On top of the fact that I think a lot of games like Mario Tennis and Mario Golf, I don't think these ever came to like any of the virtual consoles on the previous N64 virtual consoles. So like,
yeah, I can't remember. They might have done.
So I think there's like an opportunity that we can play a lot of games online, and obviously neither of us have really touched many, if any, like Genesis games. And
yes,
I think that we are you more so than me, just like very interested in going back and trying to play games that we haven't really played before, and we think there's a value like in us playing that and talking about them like to the listener and like to the podcast. And so I think in our scenario it's not much of a big deal, but I can appreciate that, when you're comparing the likes of this online service to a Game Pass, it's quite hard to compare the two in terms of value, because it's just so such a large gulf.
Yeah, it is. And even if I wasn't doing the show, I probably still would pay for it, just because I think, and someone mentioned this on Twitter, there is a way to which they have tailored this package and named it as the expansion pack, right? And they are adding an expansion to it, which is the Animal Crossing expansion. Is there a universe? And I think potentially, yes, this is why Nintendo named it this, not only just to tie in with the N64 expansion pack for the memes, but also what if Splatoon 3 comes out and then they have an expansion pack for that game? Same with Breath of the Wild 2, same with whatever is the next big Mario game, right? Like, there is a route here that they can put out DLC as part of this package and entice people to buy into that, because for Nintendo it's much more valuable to have someone on the hook potentially for years and years for all these DLC packages than someone who's just going to buy only the Fire Emblem Three Houses expansion pass, and that makes sense, right? And obviously there are certain games they probably wouldn't do it with. Pokemon, for example, I think for them is too valuable to be like, oh, we're going to roll this into our expansion pack. You have to buy that one separately. But I do think that for, not necessarily smaller games, but like, Animal Crossing is massive already, and they're putting that in here. So I do think there is a sense of like the future of this could be very bright. Alongside, they are adding some more N64 games. Now, let's not get too fucking excited about that, because to all extent, and what I predict is going to happen is, they'll do that and then they won't do any more for 7 more months, and then they'll do like 3 more, and then they'll do none for the rest of the Switch's life cycle. It's happened before, it will happen again. It's inevitable. You kind of just have to go in with it being like, okay, we're probably just going to get these Genesis and N64 games. Anything on top of that, frankly, is just, good fortune from Nintendo, because usually they don't do a lot more, even though they should be doing it, because they're charging a lot more, and I totally get all that. I just guess from my perspective of being in the UK versus the US and the price discrepancy and all these other reasons, I think it's fine. But yeah, I get why people are annoyed about it, and frankly, yeah, just don't get it then. if you're annoyed about it, I think is the operative thing to do. Not that changes Nintendo's mind at all, because I don't think they are very much paying attention to those types of things. They just want to make the money when it comes down to it.
And they overvalue all their old games, and that is, we're now on the stage of N64 that they are overvaluing, and that's frustrating, but we're getting there.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So that's happening, and I'm interested in the Happy Home Paradise thing. I never really cared about Happy Home Designer as an individual game, but I think the kind of hook of putting it into the core game, also like allowing you access to all these different items and furniture things. It's almost like a trial run for like what you might want to make your room look like, but also you unlock stuff that then you can use on your main island. So I'm definitely interested in checking it out. I probably will jump back in and give it a go. And I'm looking forward to it, because I think Animal Crossing I loved, and I really had a great time with, and any excuse to jump back in is great. So that'll be good. But yeah, let's get into video games, Mally, because we've been playing a bunch of stuff, a lot of stuff happening. They finally put out the last Super Smash Bros. Character. Sora, he's here, he's in the game, and we both played a bunch of Sora. I went through the classic mode, did a couple of online matches with him, got destroyed summarily, as is usual, and then we played against each other. We did some Smash, and it's so good to play Smash, man. Every time I play against you, it's always a great time, and there's something about having someone else who's like evenly matched that just makes it more fun, because going online, like, I do have matches I beat people, I have matches I lose, but there's never it never feels like that same kind of familiarity. We just know each other's play styles to an extent that it just makes it incredibly fun. And yeah, we played Sora against each other. You played a bit more than I did, because I think you probably connected with Sora more so. How are you feeling about him, Bally? What do you think about this anime boy?
He's fun. He's very lightweight, but his recovery moves are just insanity, and that's kind of the point, right? Like he will be knocked a very long way, but that's okay, because you can get back to the stage. And a lot of his moves do feel very vanilla, very like, you can see aspects of like Mario in a lot of the way he's weighted and things, and sort of the amount of punch he has feels quite Mario-like. And yeah, he's very vanilla, and I like that about him. And then you throw in there like his weird Firaga, or whatever you call it. Firaga and
Thundaga, Blizzard.
Yeah, exactly. I believe, all that stuff works fine. I quite like the way it rotates, and yeah, his recovery is incredible, and that's about it, really. He's not like got this crazy reinvents the whole game like you feel a lot of the other DLC characters kind of do, especially like Minecraft Steve and stuff. Just completely turns the whole game upside down. So yeah, I like that, because I think they want Sora to appeal to a very wide audience, and he's very easy to pick up and play. And he definitely, I've heard someone else say this, but like he does feel, his jump feels a lot like Mewtwo, like he's very floaty in that sense. So I'd say if you like blend Mewtwo and Mario, and then he feels a bit like that with a bit better recovery probably.
Yeah, kind of weightless almost, and like I just have to say, the way that he jumps, the wide spread of his legs and everything, it's like exactly like Kingdom Hearts 1, right? Like that animation of him jumping is so it's so beautifully rendered, and as much as like I think those games are bad, like they've done a good job of replicating the bad job, and it works, man. Like it totally is that. So it's really cool. And yeah, like you said, there are certain like really cool touches. For example, his side B, when you kind of do the drill move going like 3 times, it shows the lock-on icon that locks on
like
to the Heartless when you're fighting them. The Kingdom Hearts 1, I don't know if that's the same lock-on icon in 3 as well, but
there's something similar, an equivalent at least.
Yes, it's definitely like cool to have those little nods in there. I actually didn't do any of his taunts. I wonder if there's any fun things in his taunts, but I played as Kirby as well to try out Kirby Sora, and it's just the anime hair on top of Kirby, which is good, but you do get the 3 spells, and yeah, that's probably the most complicated thing about him is his 3 spells that rotate between each other. It's interesting that you can keep tapping it for the fire one and he'll keep putting fireballs out, but you can't do that for the other 2. You kind of only get one shot at those, because I thought when Sakurai was explaining it in the presentation that he was saying if you keep tapping it on the spells, it will keep doing the spells, but it doesn't seem that's the case for the thunder and the ice one, because I tried doing it and it didn't really work.
Is it the case that, and I've heard some people say, oh, I wish they were on 3 different inputs. Is it the case they just wanted to do that so like a 5-year-old can pick up the controller and just start bashing the special button, and they just keep doing all these combos? Like it's almost like they've just like dumbed down Sora in a way, like the fact it rotates. And I don't mind it. I quite like it because it does feel like I don't have to do very much to kind of chain a minor combo together, which I quite like. But I'm convinced they've kind of done it on purpose to make it easier to pick up.
I don't think so. I actually think the opposite. I think like the way some of these Smash characters are designed is that they want to stuff as much shit in as possible. Sakurai wants as many references, as many like unique moves as possible. And so the idea that for special moves, right, B moves especially, you have a side B that is this drill move. You have a down B that is this counter, an up B that is recovery. So like, where else are you going to put the magic stuff? And so you kind of have to squeeze it all into one button, which is neutral B, and rotating between them is probably the easiest way to do that. So I think he just didn't want to waste, not necessarily waste, but like didn't want to use moves that he could have otherwise had by doing 3 magic moves, right? Because imagine if like B, side B, and down B were 3 magic moves, then you lose out on a counter, then you lose out on the ability to do this drill recovery option. I think it's in the name of having as many different options as possible, therefore putting them all into one. Like, look at how Hero is designed. Hero has literally a menu that pops up, and you choose between a list of 40 spells, because they randomly appear every now and again, and that's like how Sakurai wants to squeeze in as much referential material as possible and get the character to a place where they feel fully formed and like they have so many more options. So I think that it's actually also a bit more strategic, because you do have to, switch between them to have the one that you want at that particular time. And so a lot of it is like, okay, I need to have Blizzaga, so I need to have used the other 2 spells before, so I need to get them in a position where I can use them, then have that lined up and ready to go for when I want to use it. So I actually think it's the opposite, that he wanted to squeeze so much in that they ran out of buttons, essentially. It's the Metroid Dread problem. You just keep running out of buttons. There's too many things you want to do with the character. But there is also a simplicity to him, and as you said, like, this isn't a Minecraft Steve. This isn't a hero. It's a character who fundamentally plays pretty simply, and yeah, just has a hell of a lot of good recovery moves. Like, you can do his down air, and that like takes him all the way down off the stage, and you can do up B and side B to get back on without too much effort, and he almost like doesn't even hang on the edge. He like lands easily on the platform after doing that. So yeah, it feels like he's a cool character that a lot of people will vibe with. For me personally, not my speed, a little too slow and floaty for me, and his animations as well, like, it is very much the Kingdom Hearts like big swing of the Keyblade to like do the hits, and it's just a little too I wouldn't say laggy, but just like a little too delayed for me to enjoy as much. But he has a lot of fun things in his arsenal. Really just reinforced as I went back to play Pirate and Mithra that they are my new mains and the best characters in the game. Yeah, just so much fun. Like, playing as Mithra, just being fast, is the greatest thing on earth. It's awesome. It feels fantastic. And yeah, Smash Bros. Is still very good. And here we are at the very end, the final character. and I applaud Sakurai for and the team for doing all this work. There's a really nice video that Good Vibes Gaming put together with a bunch of people from the games industry kind of recording themselves and thanking Sakurai and the team for Smash Brothers. I think it's called Thank You Sakurai. It's a really cool video. People should check that out. There's loads of fun industry folk who are on that as guests and just giving their kind of couple sentences, little lines of thanking Sakurai for creating this incredible masterpiece of a video game. So yeah, Smash Brothers, very good. Continues to be. Cool. Bally, you have finished up a couple of video games. Do you want to tell us of them?
Just a couple of pretty great games I've finished up. The first of those being Metroid Dread.
Yes.
Obviously, like you said, we've done a spoiler cast. So if you want my deep spoiler-filled thoughts, definitely go check that out. But this will be spoiler-free. I talked on the show before about how the door has always been left open for me to have like a favorite 2D Metroid, where a lot of them are much of a muchness in terms of like my favorites so far. And I think this title definitely takes that title. Like, I think Dread is my favorite 2D Metroid. Like, I think overall, I think it does a fantastic job of staying true to its roots. And like, I know that some people coming to Metroid find this game a bit too hard, and some people find like the jump feeling a bit weird, but ultimately like other Metroid games are very hard, and also the jump they've basically taken from the other games. And I think that while it's fair to say yes, the difficulty I liked, I think it is important to also say Nintendo should have really stuck in easy mode in this game.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, 100%.
Definitely had button remapping, but hey, you know, Nintendo are light years behind everyone else on these very, very simple things. But overall, by the end of the game, I thought stuff like the Emmys were a welcome inclusion, and I love how they give the game this distinct identity and a unique thing about the game. So overall, I really couldn't be much happier. I think there's some minor aspects I'd have, like I think some of like the artistic design in some of the worlds I think could feel a little more lived in and less level like perhaps, but I think that's a criticism you can make about a lot of Metroids.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, it's ultimately still a block-based game when it comes down to it. Like, the squares and pixels that made sense in the sprite era of Metroid, they still kind of have that as a core design philosophy, which I love personally, because that's what I love about those games, is like, you know, shooting a random block and, oh, there's a missile power-up. And obviously, it is a bit hypocritical of me of like, oh, I hate Zelda 1 where you just have to burn a random bush to find the dungeon, and yet here I'm like, oh yeah, let me just shoot every random thing in the room in Metroid. But it's what I grew up with, right? Like, I grew up with Fusion, and so that's kind of just built into my psyche, and yeah, I'm totally fine with just shooting random blocks to find your way forward. But it's a little weird, and it makes the environment feel not organic, you know, like it feels less less like a place and more like a level, as you're kind of saying. And I say this in the spoiler cast, but I do think the 3D game, the Prime games, do a better job of making those worlds feel a bit more natural, a bit more lived in. Like, definitely agree with you on that one.
Yeah, you could like imagine these enemies living in that world, you know. And I didn't feel that with this as much as I think this is still a fantastic game. I think 2D Metroid's got some space to evolve on that front, which I hope it can in the future. Like, that'd be really interesting. But yeah, Metroid Dread. Check out that game if you haven't heard about it. Can't recommend it highly
I'd be surprised if you hadn't at this point, because it seems like everyone is talking about it. I just want to say, actually, as one of my favorite things is like how much the industry is paying attention to Metroid Dread. Like,
yes, it's so nice to see, and a lot of people who obviously missed out on Samus Returns in 2017 are like obviously own a Switch now and are talking about Dread and are hyped about it, and yeah, that's great to see. From a game everyone's talking about to another game that no one seems to be talking about.
That everyone should be talking about, but no one is. Yeah,
you keep telling me that everyone's talking about this game and hyping it up on Steam, MBZ, which is great to hear. It's just a lot of the circles I listen to aren't that connected to Steam, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is. It is weird. It's one of those things about my job of like, I have realized how important Steam is as a like part of the industry where people buy video games. And like, look, Eastward is doing incredibly well on that platform and selling numbers. Also, I should point out, it was number one on the eShop for like a good while. It was number one in physical chart as well, because they have the two charts on the eShop. One is digital only, one is if you have a physical version out there. So like Skyward Sword and stuff would be on the physical one, but it wouldn't be on the digital one. And Eastward was number one on both of those on the Switch eShop. So look, people are buying it out there. There are fans of it out there. I think it's just the people that we listen to are not playing it because there's too many video games, and it's not risen to their kind of radar almost. So.
And it's a long game. It did take me about, I think, 24 hours to beat the game.
Yeah.
And I used to think like Stardew Valley was some of the best sprite design in the industry, and this title has kind of taken that award by a country mile. And it's funny I say that because Eric Barone has just released like the little trailer for Haunted Chocolatier, which seems to be using almost exactly the same sprites and engine as Stardew Valley.
Which, by the way, I just want to give a shout out to Stardew's sound design of like when you pick up items. It might be the most satisfying sound in a game.
Popping,
so good.
But it's interesting that, and like I'm sure Haunted Chocolatier mechanically will just be fantastic, and Stardew Valley is still a fantastic looking game, and Haunted Chocolatier looks good. But if you're purely talking about sprite design, like Eastward has like taken the idea of sprite design to another level that I think I'd love to see more of the industry like try and be inspired by, try and replicate, try and do something with, because
seems like it's very expensive and very hard to do given how long this game took to make. And
probably, and this game was in development for quite a long time, and it's clear that there are some really talented artists in that team
incredibly.
That Pixpil. So like
it's also like the way that they use lighting on the pixel art to create like tone and mood and atmosphere, right?
Yeah,
like, it's not just the art on its own.
Totally.
It's like the way that they blend it with modern lighting techniques that is just like
the lighting is really top tier stuff. And without going into any story spoilers, and we are going to do a mini spoiler cast on this game because I think there's a number of beats that we definitely want to pick up on and be able to talk about more openly. I just want to say I think this game delivers on a lot of its story beats in a very earthbound way.
Yes.
And I would encourage everyone to give this game a go. I don't want to say anything more than that. And yeah, like we were saying, it kind of, I would love more of my podcasting circles to be talking about this game. But yeah, I look forward to like having a proper discussion about some of the more spoilery things in this game. But I if you like Earthbound, if you like story driven, character driven, world driven, like kind of tales, I would highly recommend giving this a go. And yeah, mechanically it is doing some fairly basic Zelda-y dungeon style things, and that's maybe an area that the game, it's obviously not the focus of the game, but some of those hitboxes and things can get a little frustrating and things, but that's really not...
Yeah. I was interested in how you felt about that in the later kind of dungeon section with the enemies. There's definitely there's one big brutish enemy, if you know what I'm talking about, near the end, who like screams at you and stuff like that, which those were dangerous and scary in a lot of ways. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a minor gripe, and definitely not where a lot of the energy clearly was put in the same way as like the sprite design, for example. But yeah, people need to play Eastward, and I'm sure we will talk about this game a lot more, both in our spoiler cast, but also at the end of the year, because this is a top game.
Really special, really special game. Also, I can't stop listening to that soundtrack and humming the soundtrack. It's so good. It's
a very good soundtrack.
So good.
You've been playing another fantastic game, MBZ, and I want to get to this game.
I have been, pal. It just is the year of killer indies, man. I tell you what, I have just been playing smash hit after smash hit, and interestingly enough, this game, I started out and I wasn't as into it, I think, because I was having a bit of trouble with control. So
I'll be honest, the art style I do find a little bit jarring initially.
A little bit. So the game we're talking about is Unsighted. It is a 2D top-down action game that is very inspired by, I would say, to some degree, Hyper Light Drifter, to some degree, Zelda, to some degree, I don't know, like games with like complex, like Majora's Mask in a weird way.
Sounds like it leans a lot more Zelda and puzzles than a game like a Death's Door,
Absolutely. And that's kind of my favorite thing about it. So it was a bit of a weird one to start with. I actually initially heard about this game through Easy Allies. They did a video on it when they had a bit of a preview, and I was like, oh, this looks fantastic. And then Humble announced that they were going to put it on Game Pass, and I was like, perfect, amazing. Obviously, it's also out on Switch. It's one of those games that runs well. It's a pixel art game, and definitely I would probably have got through it a lot quicker if I had been playing it handheld, because it's kind of the way I am. But yeah, play it through Game Pass, and still, from what I hear, it's excellent on Switch, and definitely is a Nintendo-ass Nintendo game in terms of design. So the world is interesting because it is a world of automatons, almost androids, you would say, and it's set, in the future where humans have died, basically. They're all extinct, and it's just these automatons existing in society, almost a bit like Nier Automata if you played that game. And you play this character Alma, who has this sort of amnesia going on, and so you remember more as the story progresses. You get cutscenes that link back to what happened previously in like the war between these like robots and people and stuff like that. And yeah, there's this kind of resource called anima which powers the androids and like keeps them alive essentially, and that slowly just disappears over time. So every character in the game has a number of hours next to their name, which is basically how long it will be until they are destroyed, or they go unsighted, basically. So what happens is if you run out of anima, you, as an android, become what is called unsighted, and a lot of the enemies you fight in the game are these robots, and they have just basically gone crazy and are attacking you, essentially. So they lose their sense of self and identity, and they just start becoming evil machines that start attacking everybody. So yeah, you fight a lot of robots who have lost all their anima, but a lot of the NPCs you talk to are characters who could go that way, and if you do play the game with that feature turned on, then NPCs could just go crazy and you have to kill them, and then they're just out of the game. Like vendors who sell you stuff could just disappear as a result of that, and the time ticks down when you move between screens. It ticks down if you die. So for me,
you've been playing with it turned on a little bit, is that right?
So they originally, when the game came out, they had an option which was, okay, slow down the timer, basically, which gives you more ability to go through the game without having to worry how many times you die, and without having to worry about like dealing with those NPCs going missing or turning into unsighted. And I was like, that's fine, that's totally cool. But then they did a patch, because even people after that were like, well, why don't you have an option to just turn it off completely? And then I realized when I went into the menu after that patch that they had changed it so that it's a very simple on-off toggle now. So either it's on or it's off, and there's no in-between anymore.
Okay.
So yeah, basically you can choose whether to have this feature on, whether to have it off. I decided to have it off, and I don't know if that was the right move, honestly, because there is interesting stuff that I don't think I really experienced as a result of having it turned off. Like, you get this resource called meteor dust, and you can give it to characters to extend their time by 24 hours. So if you have somebody who's running out and you're like, oh, this is the cog lady, I want to buy some cogs from her for later so that I can, do well in dungeons, I don't want her to disappear, so I'm going to give her a meteor dust, and that will extend her lifespan. Also gives them an extra heart, basically. So it's like a Stardew Valley heart system where every character has 4 hearts, everyone starts at 1, and the more meteor dust you give to them, they can max out, basically. And you have this little kind of fairy bot robot who follows you around, your Navi of this game, essentially. And I maxed out their heart meter, and that was cool because then they would attack with me. Like, their final thing was they were able to
once
then,
they're maxed out, they can't turn and become unsighted at all. That's like...
No, I think they still can.
Oh, they can, right.
But it's just, you're just keeping on adding time. So 24 hours is the maximum that you can give them with each meteor dust, essentially. And yes, because I didn't do that, I didn't really see anything bad happen to the villagers or the NPCs that I was talking to, which may have lost something. But then, if I'm really honest, I don't think there's a lot interesting going on with that system. It's more so, for the help that you get from the weapons upgrader or whatever. If he goes away, then then you can't get that anymore, and that's frustrating for the game. But ultimately, narratively, I don't think it makes a huge impact. That it doesn't seem like these characters are tied to a bunch of side quests, if you know what I mean, that you could miss out on if you didn't do it. So like, I didn't really max anyone out aside from the little fairy bot with me, and I did get a bonus for doing that. The fairy bot started attacking alongside me and doing like chip damage. But I wonder if I could have got extra bonuses, like discounts at a shop for giving meteor dust to somebody or something along those lines. I wonder if that stuff is in there. But yeah, again, I didn't drill into it enough to really find out. But at the core of the game, I don't think that's what makes it interesting to me, because fundamentally this is a game that has an incredibly satisfying combat system alongside the best Zelda dungeon design that has not been done by Nintendo I have ever seen in a game.
Wow.
And
categorically?
Categorically, man. I played Okami, and I was very disappointed by that game. I think the quote-unquote dungeon design in that game is not good.
Are you going to roll in 3D as well here? We're not just talking 2D.
Just generally. Like, honestly, if I was to compare this to a Zelda game, I would say Minish Cap, because that game understands 3D Zelda design in a 2D space in the same way that this game does.
That's very cool.
It's fucking fantastic. So the thing I will say is that at the beginning, the reason I kind of bounced off it initially was I found it hard to get my head around the controls, because one button is used for run. They use the shoulder button for attacking, which that's very common in 3D games these days, but in 2D games...
Crosscode does that as well. It's like this shoulder button thing, yeah.
Yeah, and it just took me a long time. I honestly, the first 45 minutes of playing, I was in the menu like 50% of the time, just changing the buttons, and it didn't help, because every time I changed the button, I have to relearn it, and I was
maybe Nintendo have it right to stop us just fiddling around the menus for 5 hours.
Just force you to learn the way the game tells you. Yeah, to some degree, I do understand that, but it was, I just kind of got frustrated with it, and then like I got to the first village, I went outside, I died immediately, and I was like, I'll come back to this later. And it wasn't until that kind of tweet went around of one of the developers. This is also a Brazilian team. Shout out to Brazil this year. Dodgeball Academia and this game, fucking great killing it. And they were talking about how, you know, no one was reviewing this game, and it's got all these great reviews from these places, and people are loving it, but it wasn't getting attention essentially. And I was like, you know what? Like, I've heard so many amazing things about it. I should go back to it and dive in and just get over myself and just stick to a button layout and just learn it and just get good at the game. And as soon as I did that, I felt I had been an idiot, because I was like, holy shit, this game has so much going for it. First of all, there is a parry system, and this is kind of core to the combat, where enemies will have like red attack, so they will glow red, and when they do that, it means you can parry them, and by parrying them, you then get the next attack on them to be a critical hit. So parrying them kind of puts them into a stun state, and then if you attack them after that, it does like a big bunch of damage. Sometimes it's a 1-hit kill, sometimes it's a 2-hit kill, but it puts them into a place that you can kill them so much faster than if you're just spamming the attack button. The other interesting aspect is that there's a stamina bar, and so when you're running around with the run button, you actually slowly deplete stamina, but also when you swing your weapon, you deplete stamina. It's kind of like Souls, where in those games, by just taking a swing, I think maybe Jedi Fallen Order did this as well, I can't remember, with the stamina bar, if you can only take so many swings before you run out, and you have to recover, essentially. So it's like a resource of, okay, I can't just go mashing in there. It's a lot better to kind of wait, and especially when there's a big bunch of enemies, it's just like parry another one, then go in for the kill, then jump dodge out the way.
It's like a good simulation of a proper duel, you know, like it's weighted, right?
Totally.
Like
so you have it's a dodge roll, but also a jump, because there is sort of platforming in this game where you can do wall jumps, you can also like just run and jump as well, and so there is, I'd say probably some of the weakest elements for some people is that element of the platforming, where it's hard to tell because it's an isometric perspective. Like sometimes making jumps can be a bit tricky, but I would say that's kind of a minor inconvenience. There's not a huge amount of it throughout the game, and when it does happen, it's pretty clear what you need to do in order to get to the next place. But yeah, you obviously go through this overworld, and there are it's you know, here are the 5 thingamy dudes that you need to get in order to get to the final area. You know, it's a typical like collect all the crystals or whatever it is.
Five dungeons, then, you know, just
5 dungeons. You get the 5 crystals, and you use those to forge like a super mega blade, and that blade can kill like they're these big evil enemies that like are these black creatures with giant eyes and like enormous claws, and anytime you enter an area with them, your fairy bot will be, ooh, you're too weak to fight these, go back a different direction. So you're always scared of them the whole game, and then obviously at the end you get this giant massive sword that you're able to kill them with. But yeah, that's kind of the idea. And so it's also super interesting in the way these dungeons are interconnected. So there is an underground space where a lot of the dungeons are, and there's also an overground area. There's an area called the highway, which is one of the dungeon areas, and there's kind of the mid spot. So there's like kind of 3 levels to the space, and you have elevators that go up and down between them. But there are moments of like, I was in the 3rd dungeon, and I was like, oh, I have this ability now, I can break through this wall, and the wall breaks through just into the 2nd dungeon, and you can just walk from one into the other, and it's like the spaces are so interconnected that you can traverse between them. It really gives the world a feel of continuity, that these aren't separate spaces, it's one place, but you can go from one place to the other, and like the environment changes and everything, and it's just a really cool concept to have these dungeons that are actually interlinked in a way. And they don't really do a good job of saying, okay, maybe you need to go back to a previous dungeon to unlock another area, but like I don't know if I would have wanted that even, because one of the joy I think of Zelda dungeons is like the focus of them, of having puzzles that are designed for that space that you then then get an item that makes them a bit more trivial, and then you traverse the space in a different way.
So are you going back to previous dungeons, or it's just
you aren't really?
You're
just you can unlock different like secret parts of them. For example, like so there are these you can get dogs in the game as well that you name the dogs, and you can pet them and you can feed them, and the dog just runs along with you, and it's an extra thing that will attack for you. So your dog will do a bit of attacks on the enemies and not do much damage, essentially chip damage like the fairy bot was doing for me because I maxed out her gauge. But you can find 4 different dogs in the game, and usually those are found in secret areas within dungeons that you wouldn't have been able to get to the first time through. You'd have to find a link from another one to get to it, essentially.
Okay.
So there's the secret stuff like that you can get, and like different blueprints. This game has a bit of crafting to it where you can find blueprints for cogs. Cogs are kind of like temporary buffs. So like an attack cog will have 20 uses. So when you activate it, the next 20 hits you do on an enemy will be double damage or whatever. And a defense cog will have 3 uses, which means the next 3 times you get hit, you won't take any damage. And so you can activate those and you can craft those. You can also upgrade your weapons. You can choose between a sword or an axe. I went with the sword for the most part for the game because the axe is quite slow and it takes up more stamina. But I could see people playing through with that weapon because it's more powerful, right? It does more damage. So there's a lot of options in terms of combat stuff, but at the core of it, why this game is so fucking good is that it really understands what makes Zelda Dungeons fun, which is a space that is navigable and explorable to find keys by doing puzzles, by using items that you get in a dungeon to traverse spaces, and having enemy rooms. I think the thing that kind of gives it a bit of a leg up on stuff like Zelda is because the combat is so satisfying and intricate, and the parry system just adds this level of complexity, not too much, but like enough to make it more interesting, that when you get into combat rooms, it feels so much more like a puzzle because you're trying to manage the enemies and figure out, okay, which one should I take out first? I need to dodge out the way of this guy. I need to leave him for the end because he's more powerful. And alongside that, you then have your regular, like, there's block pushing stuff in there, but like in a way that is more interesting, more reminiscent of stuff like Twilight Princess's Snow Peak Mansion and those types of things, like complicated and things that you have seen before. So for example, I'm going to spoil one of the items. It's pretty early on, but it's a spinner. It's like the spinner from Twilight Princess, and I've always thought that that's one of my favorite dungeons in the series. Arbiter's Grounds, super cool because they do a little these areas with spinning puzzles that you have to figure out where to go and pinball around, and it's awesome. It sucks though because later in the game you never really use it again. This game takes that item and like does so much more with it. It becomes a traversal tool where you can use it in the overworld and you just go way faster to get places. There are rails all over the place where you can go back to previous areas and use the rails to access previous stuff. But there are also puzzles within that dungeon space with the rails that are so much fun to execute on, and like the animation and the artwork is really, really nice, and the sound design on the spinner is so cool that they take this item from Zelda's past and they give it a new lease of life to make it a far more interesting and useful and kind of I don't know, it feels great to solve puzzles with it and to break, like it has a function where there are these big rocks all over the world and this is the only item that can break them, so it becomes a bit of a lock and key thing as well. And yeah, it continues to do that. Like there are different weapons you get that help with traversal, but also in combat, right? You can, if you wanted to, you could lean into the spinner as a combat item so that it does more damage to enemies, and you can just be using that when you're fighting people. It just has such a great multi-purpose design to all the items it gives you throughout the game. And yeah, I had a blast. The 5th dungeon is so cool. Like it uses this new mechanic that they add in that is only there for that space, but it kind of makes me understand a little bit better like Mark Brown's perspective on Zelda dungeons, which is like the navigation of them and understanding where to go.
Would he approve of these dungeons?
I think so, but like they feel far easier to get around and to remember like where you were and where you need to go than a lot of 2D Zelda games that I
think Minish Cap actually does that as well, where I think a lot of those dungeons are fairly non-linear, but they still feel easier to navigate than the earlier Zeldas.
Totally, yeah. And to some extent there is a little bit of a linearity because there are certain paths that you just can't go down at the beginning, and so you're almost funneled towards.
Or they'll kind of loop back onto a central area or something. I
100%.
generally like that design a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of looping back to central areas. There's a lot of like, okay, I have one key, but there are 2 doors to unlock. Which one do I unlock? Right, like that is in there, and it's just executed in a sublime way to the point where, you know, I didn't really think about what I was doing necessarily. Like that sounds bad, but it felt like the dungeon was leading me by the nose by the invisible hand of the designer, right? Like it was so fluid, and
you're just going with your gut and going with what the designer's
yes,
wanting you to feel.
Exactly,
yeah, totally.
exactly. And it just felt so good. I honestly am blown away by the dungeon design here. I think it is incredibly good, and it's just like that is the core of what makes it special, but also like all this other stuff alongside it, like having the narrative with this world that is weird. And like I was invested in it, and there are like data logs as well, which I usually am not a big fan of, but was interested because it made sense for, you know, this ruined space where humans were gone and things were just kind of left around it. It is such a cool game, and I highly recommend people check it out. You know, if you're jonesing for a new 2D Zelda experience with a little bit more depth in the combat, this is 100% something people should be checking out, and I loved it. I think it is so good, and not super long either. I think the in-game clock is probably a bit wrong. It does the Metroid Dread thing of if you're in menus and stuff, it doesn't count time played. It said like 6 hours 57, so about 7. So I would probably peg myself around 9 hours total in the game. So for a game like this, that's a great length, I think, and yeah, I really recommend it.
From what you've said, it does, like, you've talked all about the combat and the dungeon design, and
yes,
you've really not focused on this sort of Unsighted thing that they're doing with the time ticking down, and
yeah,
you're kind of making me lean towards just turning it off, but maybe you're right. I'd miss big story beats, or you've not really mentioned the story a ton, so maybe it's not a big deal. But
yeah, I did look up, there is a kind of secret ending if you go and do a bunch of extra stuff that I just didn't end up doing, obviously, because we tend not to do that, and it didn't really change that much. Like, I think it's neat, but I would probably recommend, like, if you don't want the stress of it and you just kind of want to play it at your own pace, because
I'm still going to get the benefit of like these dungeons and combat, which is ultimately the best
totally
bit of the game from what you're saying. So,
and I think part of the scary thing is, like, if you're not very good, then every time you die, the clock goes forward, right? And I don't actually know what that means if you run out of time. Like, if Alma, your main character, runs out of time, does that mean the game ends and you have to restart? Because that sounds bad, and I don't know if that's the case, but yeah, for me, I just didn't want the stress of it, so I just turned it off, and ultimately that wasn't really what I was there for. Like, I'm sure there is some cool stuff going on with it, but I don't think
it's an interesting choice on their part.
It is, I think it is, and I think there is a way it maybe could have been done better to make me more invested in it, but at the end of the day, this is just a fucking fantastic Zelda game, and I think people should really check it out on that basis alone. So yeah, Unsighted on Switch, on Game Pass.
I need to get
Check it out. I'm definitely going to be bringing it up in the future. So cool. That is going to close us out, however, for the first segment of the show. Don't go anywhere, because we'll be back after the break with some of your emails that you've sent in, and yeah, I'll be chatting through those. So see you guys in a bit.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second part of today's show. It is time for some emails. We put out the call a little while ago and people responded, and we are still working our way through all those emails, and we've got 3 wonderful emails and messages on our Discord lined up for you today. But if you would like to send an email into the show, please email thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That is thisnintendolife@gmail.com. And like I said, you can also post a comment in our Discord server. We've got a channel just for emails. So join the community, get involved. We'd love to hear your questions, your thoughts, your comments, and we'll read them out on the show. Our first email is from Justin, who's from Pennsylvania in the USA. Says, hello, fellas. 3 questions. So let's just do these one at a time. MBZ. Number 1, who is the worst video game character of all time? My vote goes to Hao from Pokemon Sun and Moon. The rival from Sword and Shield isn't much better either.
I think this probably won't come as a shock to people, but Isun from Okami fucking sucks shit and can just die. I think Hao is a good choice from Sun and Moon, because I think a lot of people... I think there's this thing generally, right, with the Pokemon games. This is maybe bleeding into Animal Crossing as well, of like, you know, back in the day... you know, your rival from Gold and Silver was a piece of shit, and like he acted like a piece of shit. He never tried to be nice to you in any way, and was always just a complete and utter asshole.
You called him fuck.
I did. Yeah, I was naughty back in my day.
That's a bold move from like a 10-year-old right there.
This was before you know, Nintendo had word filters going on in their games to stop naughty words.
I'm very surprised they didn't have one.
Yeah, but this was obviously the age in which we played Gold and Silver. We were trying to learn swear words at the time, and I was like, I'm going to call him the swear word, and that's what I did. So that was very funny to me as a young child. But yeah, I think there's kind of a discourse of people being like, oh, these characters used to be like actually not like the player character, and then Nintendo's kind of philosophy on how you should treat players, I guess, has changed, because all the new Pokemon games and the new Animal Crossing, for example, everyone loves you and treats you like the second coming of Christ. Even someone who's supposed to be your quote-unquote rival are people who are just fucking wet blankets and just are not interesting in any way at all. Same with Sword, as this was mentioned in the question, but the Sword and Shield rival, also terrible, boring, and just not interesting.
I think, Gary back in the day with the anime, he was a right dick, like, you know, and I think the games were, I guess, trying to emulate that a bit, right?
Well, I mean, the games came before the anime, but sure, yes, vice versa.
That's also true, but in the West, they were like the same time. But
yeah, I think like some of it bled through if you're thinking about like what happened with Pokemon Yellow, like taking Team Rocket into the games from the anime.
Yeah.
Like some of that spice definitely bled over, and I think that bleed over continued into the second generation. But like I would say it was kind of from X and Y onwards, maybe, that things started to get a little weird. I guess Wally was a weird one in Ruby and Sapphire, and though didn't you have multiple ones in Ruby and Sapphire as well? There was Wally, but there was another person, I want to say. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but there were definitely, like, in X and Y, you had kind of a friend group of 4 people, and like none of them were really a rival or didn't like you. They're all just kind of like, we're gonna conquer the world of Pokemon with the power of friendship, yay! Like that's kind of their attitude.
Don't underestimate friendship. It's a powerful force in the world of Pokemon, right?
It's definitely important in anime and lots of other things. Yes, of course. But yeah, I mean, talking of that, I mean, if you want another terrible character, the Nopon from Xenoblade 2, I think begins with a T. I can't remember what his fucking name is, but he's also really bad. He's just like gross, in a similar way to Isun, like kind of misogynist and really not a good character archetype, but kind of plays it off as comedy almost. And yeah, that's bad also. So yeah, kind of a theme going in terms of the characters that I think are just the worst characters. But I'm sure there are a lot of like other terrible ones. Those ones just kind of resonate with me as being particularly terrible. Bali, any that you have in particular?
I'd go with both Fi and Navi from the Zelda series. I think both of them are annoying in different ways, and I think Navi's one of those ones that just like, hey, listen, and it just kept happening. And I think a lot of people had that frustration with Ocarina of Time, and I don't think the 3DS remake that I played felt any better on that front. I'd also say Princess Peach, like, she's just not like where princesses need to be at this point in time. And I think that Nintendo really like shot themselves in the foot when she had her own spin-off DS game where her powers were completely related to her feelings and this sort of thing. And I just think Peach can. It's not Peach's fault. It's her writer's fault. But I think she's just not a great character. Now maybe there's those Nintendo fans I'm just hating on me right now, but I don't know. What do you think about Peach?
I mean, yeah, a lot of Nintendo's characters don't really have any character to them. Is probably the MO there. But yeah, I mean, you know, she's a paper thin like stereotype is kind of the way. And I don't know. I think the end of Mario Odyssey is the most interesting Peach has been, right? Where she's like, "Screw you guys, I'm going on holiday. Leave me alone." And then you just find her in all the different kingdoms dressed up as like
that was very fun. That was a
in
really
her different
fun
outfits.
idea. It proved that Nintendo maybe aren't completely modern in their views on these things, but they've like taken an inch in the right direction.
Slight movement.
I think he's going in a better direction now, but I'm a bit sick of Kirby. You know, Kirby's just an annoying pink blob, and it's like, come on, we need more from him. And he's going in the right direction in his defense. And I think his game next year looks really cool. So that'll be fun. And I've listed every single Kingdom Hearts character who's not from Disney.
Oh yeah, no, any Square Enix invented like Organization 13 guy with the big hair. I don't know any of them. I'm sure they're lovely people. I'm sure you get to know them.
They just merged into one amorphous anime person in my head.
Yes.
And
maybe they are. Who knows? Maybe that is the twist. That they are all a singular person.
When you have such a complex story with so many characters and they are all like clones of each other, it's very confusing. I struggle with all that.
What are your thoughts on Yen Sid? I only realized recently that his name is Disney backwards.
Well, he's a legit Disney character. That's not his first appearance.
Right, okay.
He's Yen Sid is the wizard from The Sorcerer's Apprentice. That's the hat.
Shit.
That's the hat that Mickey steals from the sorcerer. He is the original sorcerer.
Damn, dude. I thought he played a pretty big role in the Kingdom Hearts series, so I just assumed he was
He also does, yeah. He is in 3 as well and plays a role, which is fun. So yeah, don't put Yen Sid in with all the Square Enix bollocks, because he is a Disney character through.
You know what?
Right?
Like, I don't know, something about that maybe tells me why this ended up happening. Is like there maybe is a bit of weirdness that you could cross over from Disney into Kingdom Hearts. But anyway,
that's probably
that kind of became his whole thing. Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure there are some really terrible video game characters. It depends like what you mean by worst video game character, right? Do you mean like personality? Do you mean like the game is bad and it's not fun to play as the character? Because like I think Duke Nukem would be up there for a lot of people as like a very 90s kind of in-your-face protagonist who, by the time Duke Nukem Forever came out in, 2007 or 9 or something like that, when that game finally released after, like, a 2-decade development cycle, everyone was like, oh, actually, maybe we should have just left Duke Nukem in the 90s, because this guy kind of sucks real bad. So, yeah, I think that's definitely a different route you can go down. But, yeah, for me, Issun from Okami is number one. Just terrible character who I hate deeply.
Justin's second question is, do you think that the wireless N64 controller announced during the September Direct will have built-in rumble? It makes sense that the NES and SNES controllers did not, since that feature never existed to begin with. Modern rumble technology can hopefully be built into the new design of the N64 controller. Though rumble isn't required, it is impactful in certain games. The Stone of Agony item in Ocarina of Time relies on the rumble feature, and it would just be strange to play some of those N64 classics without the rumble feedback. And then Justin also had a third question about the Switch online service more generally that we kind of covered in the first segment.
Yeah, about the price and stuff, which I think we've addressed a little bit. So yeah, we haven't really talked about the wireless Genesis and N64 controllers, just because they're things I don't think either of us are interested in picking up personally. I think it's cool that Nintendo are making them. It's less cool that they cost like 50 quid or whatever to buy them, and you also have to be a Nintendo Online subscriber in order to do it. But hey, people will buy them because people love using classic controllers.
It's one of those things where we bought the SNES Classic, right? And I think that cost us what, 60 quid, 50 quid?
70, something like that, yeah.
70. It felt like a decent deal because you're getting 2 SNES controllers on top of like all these games and the save states and a little cute little box that plugs into an HDMI. Like, it felt like a good package. I think when you detach the hardware from the software in the way that, you know, the Switch Online stuff does it to a degree, like, it doesn't feel like a good proposition from my perspective, at least. And that, like, I felt very happy with the package that was the SNES Classic, and the idea of it's just like paying through the nose for some modern N64 controller just doesn't interest me in the slightest.
Is a play on nostalgia, and other companies have done it, right? Xbox released the original Duke controller again for people to buy, and I wouldn't put it past Sony doing like a
with the black and white buttons.
Yeah, totally, and I wouldn't put it past Sony to do like an anniversary PS1, DualSense at some point, things like that, right? Like, well, either they skin it to be the color of the thing, or they remake the old controller and put it out there. Like, nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and people are addicted to it, and people will continue to pay money in order to relive their golden days as best they can, and that's exactly what this is, right? I think a lot of people were annoyed that the Genesis was the 3-button as opposed to the 6-button controller, because the 6-button is what a lot of people prefer when it comes to Genesis stuff, so that's a bit of a shame. I think Japan might be getting the 6-button, so if you wanted to do that, then you'd probably have to go through a bunch of loopholes in order to get it, but yeah, I think probably, will it have Rumble? Probably, I imagine. I always found it interesting that the Wavebird back in the day on GameCube didn't have Rumble, and it's one of those things that you don't know that you're missing until it's gone, and then you're like, wait, I feel like I should be having Rumble at this point, but there isn't any.
And 64 had some hella Rumble as well. Like, it really rocked my wrists. Like,
part of it is because you had to have a pack to like plug into the controller, so like that probably factored into how impactful it was, because it was an additional piece that was plugged in that was kind of shaking it from the outside almost, right? Like,
because it's attached, you're right, it's shaking the entire controller from the outside, meaning it has to go hard.
Right, the vibrations came from a different place. It wasn't like internally within the controller itself. So I think, even if you were to have Rumble in this N64 controller, it would feel quite different from what it did back in the day, just because of that component, right? Unless Nintendo are going to be insane, and I wouldn't honestly put it past them to be like, and also announcing the add-on for the N64 controller, the Rumble pack that you can buy if you're a Switch Online member.
Or if you could use your old Rumble packs and Game Boy cartridge in the new one, that would be fun.
Yeah, that would be, but like, I don't know.
I've still got all those. I've got one Rumble pack and one Game Boy transfer pack. So
totally, and that stuff is cool. But yeah, I think this day and age, it probably makes more sense to just have Rumble built in. All modern wireless controllers have Rumble, so I don't think that's a similar problem that you had back with the Wavebird days. But I do notice it actually, because my Series X controller that I use on my PC, I'm just using regular batteries for at the moment. I will go and get the battery pack at some point, but I do notice that when the battery gets low, the controller just turns Rumble off. It just basically gets rid of it, just to prolong the life of the battery for as long as possible. And I was playing, I think, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and it has like cool trigger stuff where, like, when you're using the axes to go into walls to climb up them, it kind of feels like that stuff is happening, like a lighter level than the DualSense stuff, and you do miss it when you start playing. You're like, oh wait, where was that thing that I was kind of missing? So yeah, I think Rumble is one of those underrated things that has probably become more apparent to people with DualSense being a big deal, as well as HD Rumble, which I actually want to give a shout out to some HD Rumble recently. Eastward had some really cool HD Rumble on like the train tracks when you're like on the train and stuff like that, and there's another I think Dread also does some pretty cool stuff with HD Rumble. So I don't want to forget Nintendo's contribution to the space, because as much as it's not as impactful as what Sony has done, I still think HD Rumble is cool, and I do like it. So yeah, I do think that they will. I mean, I say that, but then I'm like, okay, well, Nintendo probably is going to cheap on some of the parts in terms of this thing, and they're not going to make it like the most, fully fledged thing. But that said, like, a Switch Pro controller costs what, £10 more than this does. So you would think that if they're putting all the technology into that, they'd probably do it for this. Well, that's the price of nostalgia, man. That's what people will pay for. So I think probably it will be the case.
Probably, yeah.
But yeah.
Looking forward to a bit of that feedback when hitting that ball of Mario Tennis. It's a big deal.
What I'm really interested in? I want to see people playing just normal Switch games with the N64 controller, right? Just like play Smash Brothers with that and see if you can go back to those days. Because obviously, the original Smash Brothers was on N64 and probably had a different setup, but it feels like GameCube has become like the default controller of Smash Brothers since then. So yeah.
I'm surprised they've not done this controller yet with either the Wii or the Wii U. Like released some sort of wireless N64 controller before. Like, it's kind of shocking that it's not until this stage that they've gone for it.
Yeah. I mean, bringing up the Wii, when I was playing Xenoblade back in the day on the Wii, using the Classic Controller Pro, that very much was a piece of plastic, like one of the lightest pieces of plastic ever, and certainly did not have any rumble built into it, because you kind of plugged it into the Wiimote.
Plugged it into the Wiimote. I had the regular Classic Controller,
Yes.
which didn't have the arms, on
No
it.
handles to hang on
the
to,
handles.
yeah.
And after a long, I kind of felt like a bit of a Super Nintendo controller, I guess, in your hand to a degree,
Yeah.
but it's not. It just kind of didn't. I like having something to grip onto, basically, is what I mean. It wasn't the most comfortable, especially with analog sticks.
I initially actually bought a knockoff Classic Controller from Amazon, and that was really bad. It was like when you press the left on the D-pad, it would go down and stuff like that. Well, because I'm an idiot, but Bally, this is what
don't
I've
fall into the third-party trap with these controllers, unless they have some very good reviews,
Since then, I have not done that anymore. I did it a lot when I was younger, mainly because it was cheaper. My parents didn't want to spend money on
memory cards.
Yeah, super expensive stuff, and I did have a GameCube controller that was also a third-party thing, and I've looked at the Daemon X Machina Switch Joy-Cons and stuff like that, and there are third-party Joy-Cons that you can buy, but after all my experience with third-party stuff, I tend to just stick with the main first-party peripherals at this point in time, because it's just too much of a hassle, and they work and they do the job, and it's just don't want to deal with it. But yes. Anyway, I hope that N64 and Genesis controllers are good and people like them, but yeah, probably not something I'm going to be touching anytime soon.
Yeah. Our next question is from Tim, who's from Wisconsin, and says, "Hello, MBZ and Bally. My question for you this time is this. What are some games that you love despite either the story or the gameplay being subpar? In other words, what are some games you love for their gameplay but have a forgettable story, or games with a great story but forgettable gameplay? Some of my own examples for good gameplay but meh stories. The first games that come to mind are Star Fox Assault, Advance Wars 1 and 2, and Fire Emblem Fates. I find the opposite more difficult to think of. The only games that come to mind are games like The Walking Dead and To the Moon, where the game is mainly about story and the gameplay is barely there, or just QTEs. Yuck. I look forward to hearing your picks, and as always, thanks for the show." Tim from Wisconsin.
Thanks, Tim. Been thinking about story and gameplay in terms of their nature with games that I connect with, and I feel similar to Tim in terms of the games that are just focused purely on story are kind of the ones where I'm gravitating towards the most, because that's I don't actually really care what the game is. I'm really there to experience a narrative, and that's similar with the To the Moon games and Walking Dead and a lot of the Telltale stuff, Life is Strange, those types of things. Tell Me Why,
Yeah.
right? It's far less. That's just not the point of them, and I don't really care about what.
But I agree that when Walking Dead does try to be a bit more actiony with the QTEs and stuff, maybe not the QTEs necessarily, but there are other parts where you are doing weird action things. It's arguably some of the weakest parts of the game, and you just wish that that it kind of ditched those out entirely and just went more for the story, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think those games have done that over the years and have kind of gotten rid of those elements because they feel extraneous. The first Walking Dead game had a bunch of point-and-click style puzzles, which weren't overly complicated, but they kind of shed those as they went along with the series, as it evolved from being a point-and-click game that had more narrative focus to being a narrative-focused game that completely got rid of the point-and-click stuff, essentially. And yeah, I gravitate towards that stuff a lot more strongly, I think. So, but yeah, in terms of more traditional games, I guess, are there any where you were just there for the gameplay or just there for the story more so than the other?
I mean, when we're thinking about gameplay as the focus, you could arguably put every single Nintendo game into this category.
Oh, 100%.
Especially because so many of them are so story weak. And it's actually kind of funny recently. Greg and Blessing were having a discussion. I don't know if you remember this discussion. They were saying they were trying to list games, and they were interacting with the chat at the time, sort of saying, are there any games that are 10 when it comes to mechanics and story? And it's actually a really hard question to think about. And Blessing kept sort of saying Breath of the Wild, but it's like there's no way Breath of the Wild is like, a 10 out of 10 story. And likewise,
yeah, I mean, it depends what you're talking about with story, right? Because like
this is all very subjective, totally,
Yeah.
and story can be defined as anything.
because like the directed cutscenes and the actual plot parts of Breath of the Wild, I would say are pretty sketch when it comes to the voice acting and like
Well, exactly,
the actual what you get from it. But like the lore based like world storytelling of Breath of the Wild, I think is actually very good, right? Like just looking around a space and seeing, oh, this is broken down and there's like notes and stuff like that. I think that stuff is quite good.
Yeah, and like overt storytelling versus like less obvious for sure.
Yeah.
I'd actually go with something like Celeste that actually does manage to convey a very intriguing story that is, I would argue, a 10 out of 10. That's obviously subjective, but then is at the same time so incredibly mechanically strong and
also melds them both, right? It's the matching and
yeah.
being able to like the whole, I guess, pitch of Celeste is climbing the mountain mentally, and you're also doing that physically, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the way that it works, and like the state of Madeline throughout that game is reflected through the spaces you go through as well as the people you meet, and how that kind of journey with yourself is reflected within the story, but also like you as a player going through these harder and harder challenges to reach the peak and get past it and being able to surpass what you maybe didn't think you were able to. I think Celeste's a great example of that, honestly, of a game that just absolutely nails it when it comes to those elements.
It excels at both of those things individually, and as you say, the way that it merges the two on top of that, which is arguably like a third pillar between these 2 points, arguably. Like it's weird. I would give Horizon as a good game, where I know you weren't a big fan of the story, but I absolutely loved the story and totally appreciate that game mechanically has quite a few weaknesses where I think that Guerrilla Studios like ideally wanted the mechanics to be stronger than how they were conveyed to me, at least. Like, but I was so hooked by that world and especially the storytelling.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of big games these days that don't do it for me on a mechanical level, but I'm there to kind of enjoy the conversation around their narrative stuff and like what goes on. I mean, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game that I just pushed myself through despite actually despising playing the game, because I thought
really
that the narrative and the character stuff was just excellently done. But like, man, I don't ever want to fucking play that game again. It did not do that. It probably the best example of a game where I actively disliked playing it, but continued to because I wanted to see what was going to happen, which is definitely a weird one. It doesn't happen super often, but that is a major one for me.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of other ones.
I've got a whole list if you want me to go through.
Yeah, go for some of the list.
I think the Yakuza games are interesting in that like some of them I just don't really want to care about fighting, and I just flip it to easy, and I'm just like, just mash me through these fights, whatever. I want to see the weird side quests. I want to interact with all the goofy characters, and I want to see this drama play out, and that stuff is great fun. Alongside, like, the minigame stuff is really good. So there are elements of, like, Kiwami 2 and the entire fucking side story where you're running a hostess club is just fan-fucking-tastic. Like, love that minigame. One of the best minigames in video games, I'm going to say. Probably my favorite minigame in video games. I did spend like a good 12 hours just playing that, so it's pretty much up there. But when it comes to actually beating people up in the street, I was just like, yeah, this is fun to an extent, but like I would rather just get through this quickly so that I can get onto the other stuff. And that changes. Like the Judgment games, I like the combat a lot more. I play those games on normal because I actually enjoy the kind of like movement of Yagami as a character and his abilities and stuff like that. But yeah, I guess like generally for Yakuza, I'm there for the vibe and the world and the space, far more than, the actual gameplay mechanics, if you want to talk about combat, stuff like that. Same with Wolfenstein reboot that came out, which has competent first-person shooting, and like for a lot of people I think was super difficult because they played it on normal or hard, and from the beginning I was like, give me baby ass fucking baby mode. The thing about Wolfenstein is that it literally when you pick a difficulty level, it shows BJ Blazkowicz, and like it has all these ridiculous names for the difficulty levels, and when you pick the easiest mode, it's basically called baby baby mode, and it shows a picture of BJ with a baby's like dummy in his mouth and like a bonnet on his head. So the game is almost like making fun of you for choosing easy, but I was like, I don't fucking care. I don't give a shit, man. I'm here to see the ridiculous ride that this is. And yeah, Wolfenstein 2 especially, one of those games where I just couldn't put it down because I needed to get to the next story beat and see what wild shit would happen next, and shoot some people in a very easy way to get there, basically. So those are two big ones on the I wanted to get to the story front and didn't really care about the game aspect of it.
Right. No, totally. And then often like a game like a To the Moon, like a Night in the Woods,
yeah,
you know, that it's hard to even define those games as having formal mechanics, as it were. Like you're essentially like moving from point to point, talking to people. And I think that's where, like we were saying at the start of this question, like that's where a lot of these story-driven games are at their best, where they're not trying to do the Walking Dead QTEs or something. They're not trying to insert some sort of action system into a game through because they feel they have to. They are just like, right, we're getting across some messages and we want to do this in the leanest, most efficient way we want to do in our world, and we're not going to include like any mini games or we don't need to do that. We can just tell a story. And I think that's a good example of the way that the medium has evolved, I think, in the last decade or so, is that we are having a lot more games that don't have formal or traditional mechanics as such and are just much more bold to tell a story.
Yeah, and I think it just needs to be a discussion of like what a mechanic is, or like what is quote unquote gameplay, right? Because in some senses, me going around Kamurocho and finding the next area is in a sense like gameplay, because I am figuring out the space in my head and I'm learning where to go. And like that's the same with Night in the Woods, of like there are choices of like, do I want to talk to this person or this person, or you know, do I want to go and do this side quest before I continue with the main story? Like there is still player agency, even if the actual quote unquote mechanics, like if we were talking about stuff like combat, which is so often what the conversation around mechanics comes down to, is like, oh, the combat, or like the way in which you interact with the game, like a rhythm game that you have to play this or stuff like that, is what we define under mechanics and gameplay. Whereas I think, you know, there is a difference between watching a playthrough of Night in the Woods and playing it yourself, because of the way that you insert your own kind of movement and like,
and that is the mechanic, right?
Desire to go places, and that is the game being played in a way, right? Like it's just like trying to frame it in a different sense that we usually do, which is difficult, and games are evolving that way, and kind of we're figuring them out a bit more. But yeah, there's definitely a bunch of games like that, you know, and Danganronpa is a good example for me, where like the mini games to get through the court trial sections I didn't love all the time, but obviously wanted to get through that because the story was so good. And Nier Automata, also a game that I didn't really like the combat of playing it or stuff like that, but the actual kind of themes resonated really strongly. And yeah, on the opposite side, I would say stuff like, I don't know, Octopath Traveler, Pokemon, games where I enjoy the kind of mechanical battle systems and that type of stuff, and going through a world and seeing stuff, but didn't think the story was worthwhile or even interesting. And this happens a lot, I think, with character action games as well. Stuff like Astral Chain and Bayonetta, Devil May Cry, like they're very rich in terms of their systems and like, you know, spectacle, but the actual writing and storylines are very over the top and absurd and very cheesy and corny in a way that isn't like interesting or engaging on a deep level.
It's not like I cannot wait to see what's the twist is, or you know.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah. It's more like, oh, this is kind of a fun sauce on top of the weird action that I'm doing.
Right.
So yeah, I probably think the best example of like a game with a serious story that I didn't care a huge amount about, but kind of wanted to, was Metal Gear Solid 5, where I think a lot of Metal Gear fans were disappointed with 5 because of the fact that it was kind of unfinished and like didn't really wrap things up well, and the story is not on the same level as the other Metal Gear games, which like the kind of the reason to play the Metal Gear series up till the point of 5 was the narrative stuff, because that's the weird, crazy characters and bosses and all that stuff is super interesting.
And then they just load in and then load more mechanics, right? Like,
and then 5 is just like the purest, most incredible stealth sandbox ever made. Like the options you have and like the movement and the feel of it is just like incredible. And that's like the opposite to like how Metal Gear games were before, where like, yeah, there's kind of janky stealth stuff which isn't super great, and like those early games especially probably quite hard to go back to from a gameplay perspective, but like completely flipped the script. And MGS5, like, oh my goodness, among like the best open worlds that I have enjoyed messing around with, not from a sense of exploration, but a sense of like options and ability to just play with a physics sandbox in a wild fucking way, that just creates player stories in an awesome sense. So yeah, that's probably my big gameplay one versus story.
Yeah. Thanks for your question, Tim. That's a good one. Really enjoyed that. Our next question is from Jiff, and this is on Discord. Says, been listening since the beginning, and I don't think I've written in emails before, so here's a question. Is there a console or era of games that you haven't whole hog jumped into yet but would like to check out sometime in the future? I collect a lot of physical games and have been really into the early 3D era with the Sega Saturn lately. I've also been diving into some of the DS deep catalogue because looking back I realised I mostly just played Pokemon and Zelda on it when there were tons of cool, weird games on there. I know with all the new stuff coming out, it can be hard to find time to hit up the past, but I've found there's as much fun to find behind us as there is in front of us. So are there any blind spots in your gaming experience you'd like to fill out more? Thanks, as always.
Sega. That's kind of my answer. I think generally is probably my biggest blind spot that I would like to fill, which is kind of why I'm excited about the Genesis stuff on Switch Online, because there are a bunch of classic games from the Sega collection that I've just not really dived into in the past. And like, obviously there's been ways to access them through Wii Virtual Console and Wii U in the past, and there are collections that Sega put out themselves, and maybe it's a case of like people don't really talk about it as much because there isn't as much interesting to go back to, and maybe you kind of had to be there at the time to really get interested in all that stuff. But Genesis is definitely a catalog I'm curious about and will be diving into when that Switch Online stuff happens. I would say more widely, like, I want to get even deeper into the Super Nintendo than I already am. Like, I think we've played a lot of the kind of core tentpoles there, but the Super Nintendo is a library rich with so much stuff, especially like RPGs. That's the thing that I'm kind of want to go after, and I think Super Nintendo and PlayStation 1 are kind of like the golden era when it comes to JRPG stuff, and there's certainly things like Suikoden that I need to get to. There's a bunch of just like very deep cut PlayStation RPGs. Wild Arms, I believe, is a series that a lot of people really enjoyed, that I would like to play someday, and yeah, loads of stuff on that front. So in terms of like a genre deep dive, I'd probably go for Super Nintendo and PlayStation on RPG things, but I'm also curious about the PSP. PSP has been one that I kind of skipped out on, and I have a Vita, so there's access to PSP games through that, but there's definitely like a lot. It's probably my biggest blind spot of like modern games, of like what came out on that. What were the weird spin-offs from Sony games that came out there, and what were the like unique things that I missed and want to go back to. So yeah, those are probably kind of the major ones for me in terms of stuff that I want to dig into. But there's loads, like I would love to own a Dreamcast at some point in time, or at least have access to play Dreamcast games. Yeah, even going, I don't know, I think one of the interesting ones for me is I have little to no interest in the PlayStation 2, mainly because I grew up around it, and I think, thinking about like the games from that era that have held up the best, like GameCube by far to me holds up far better than what I imagine a lot of PS2 games are like these days. I'm sure there's a lot of good stuff there, but, and people kind of...
Can you like even think of like 10... top tier PS2 games that you feel like you haven't played that you should or need to play? Like I could way more about games than me, obviously, but like I couldn't think of maybe like 3, honestly. Like
I just think of like what are the core things that Sony first party was doing back then, which is like the Jak and Daxter stuff, the Ratchet and Clank stuff, Sly Cooper.
It's all on PS Now, annoyingly, which isn't.
Yeah, God of War started on PS2. There are a lot of things that
I'd like to play those games as well.
Yeah, I guess from a first-party perspective from Sony, it was just not as strong as it is nowadays in terms of their stable. So a lot of it is third-party stuff, and just weird shit that came out that I would have played at friends' houses, and didn't really resonate with me strongly. I mean, the GTA games are getting remastered, right? All those classic GTA games. That's kind of what I think a lot of people think about when they think about the PlayStation 2 era, is the GTA games, and certainly I did play a bunch of those back in the day, so I might be interested in checking them out again just to reminisce a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. There's definitely I'm definitely wrong about this. There's definitely like a deep, wide well of interesting PlayStation 2 stuff, just because it was the best-selling console, and obviously it had a ton of games made for it. But I guess in terms of my personal taste and stuff that I care about, it feels like an era of B games more so than anything, of like generic action games and generic shooters and stuff like that didn't really. It's not the type of stuff that I think is worth going back to in the modern era, I think it's worth playing Super Nintendo games. I think it's worth playing some Genesis games to an extent, right? Like, there are certain generations that I think just hold up better, and for me, the stuff that came out on PS2, when I look back at it, compared to what Nintendo was doing on GameCube, there's just like a higher level of polish, and like there's a way in which GameCube games just feel like so much more playable today than PS2 games. But again, that's me talking from a Nintendo fan's perspective, which it could be totally different if I actually went out and tried them and gave them a go. But there's interesting stuff on there. There's a couple of good Final Fantasies, Final Fantasy X and X-2 alongside Final Fantasy XII, both of which have had remasters, and which I probably will play on a remastered sense in a while. But yeah, I don't know. It's I'll probably have to do a bit more research when it comes to that. Bally, do you have any particular hardware deep dives that you want to go on?
Do I have any blind spots? Well, where don't I have blind spots, to be honest? But so obviously I've owned only Nintendo consoles right up until 2018, and as you said, basically the show as we kind of had it between 2013 and 2018 on my side of games that I was playing lots of obviously new Nintendo releases, but like you were saying, MZ, we went back and we played quite a lot of old Super Nintendo games through like the Wii U Virtual Console especially, and then obviously the Super Nintendo Classic that came out. And that's been like my main kind of blind spot that I've delved back and played games from. And then obviously everything changed in 2018, where I went cross-platform, bought a PS4, obviously bought Xbox, PS5, Series X since then. And my main blind spots I've been trying to cover since 2018 are kind of like earlier entries in current hot series. And what I mean by that is like going back and playing all the Uncharted. So I've played all those now. Going back and like playing, I don't know, I would like to try a game like God of War. I kind of came in on 2018.
Shadow of the Colossus is a good example of a PS2 classic that you played recently.
Right, totally. I really wanted to play like Shadow of the Colossus, and then likewise its follow-up, The Last Guardian, on PS4. So like, I'm glad I played those games, and I definitely wanted to kind of cover the Sony first-party bases. And you're right, they have a lot much kind of stronger group of games, first party at least now, than they did arguably kind of the PS2, PS3 era. But that's still a big blind spot for me. It is like a lot of those other PS2, PS3 games. I've been like going back and trying to cover like Xbox era games now that they're all basically all on Game Pass. Everything,
and also like Microsoft's backwards compatibility stuff means that you can do that and get 360 stuff as well as original Xbox stuff so easily.
It's really cool. And obviously stuff like Halo has been remastered, and I've actually gone back and played every single Halo game in the build up to Infinite, which is like, try telling 2015 Bally that, you'd be like, what?
You'd be like, who are you?
Yeah,
Get out of my house.
I'm going to like hopefully play Halo 5 next month ahead of Infinite in December, and so I'm enjoying stuff like that. But I want to go back and play like Fable Anniversary Edition, or give that a go, and just trying to get on top of like some of these other big first party games that are from like Sony and Microsoft, because I think there's a lot of good stuff there that I just had been completely starved of. And then don't even talk to me about like all the Sega stuff that you just mentioned, because I'm completely out of the loop on all that stuff, and I'm looking forward to like all these Mega Drive games on the expansion pass coming,
the expansion pack
in November. So looking forward to play some of those games with you. But yeah, I think I've covered a lot of the big ones when it comes to Nintendo generally.
I think if we're talking about like deep dive, then I feel like I want to go on GBA Town and like just download a bunch of ROMs for the GBA, and that's kind of looking to like old emulation stuff with that stuff at the moment. And should I get a handheld that is like dedicated to that, because Nintendo doesn't seem interested in fucking putting GBA games on Switch right now, and it's like, man, like what about that Astro Boy game that's super rare that people always talk about? I want to check that out. And like I played Gunstar Superheroes earlier this year, and like there's like the Golden Sun games to go back to. For me, like that's a console I really love, and would like to expand my library for. I guess when it comes to Nintendo stuff, that's what I'm all about, is stuff like GameCube games and DS games and GBA games. Those are the library, and Wii as well, like libraries that I just want to keep expanding into like the deep dark corners of, right? Like I think I'm okay having like a surface level knowledge of Sega Genesis stuff, for example. But if I want to go super deep on something, like find some weird RPGs on DS, that's where I'm going to go. Of like, I don't know, what else is out there? There's so much weird stuff. Like DS has a ridiculously rich library of insane games that I definitely want to plumb the depths of at some point in time. So yeah, when it comes to Nintendo deep dives, sky's the limit, or I guess the ground's the limit, or whatever the hell you want to call it, whatever analogy you want, in terms of stuff that I want to just have a look at and just know about. So
and we do still have like plenty of Nintendo blind spots that we do try and cover in stuff like backlog clubs, and I think that's always like a really good thing we've tried to do with the show, where there are just games that we missed for whatever reason, even modern ones, that we're just like, yeah, we should do that for a backlog club, and like have a proper in-depth discussion about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, are there any blind spots in our gaming lives? Yes, too many.
Too many.
And there continue to be too many.
Yeah. And a lot of what we've talked about is often like, first party or like fairly big games, but then, there are so many indie games coming out now that like in 10 years time, we will go back and be like, God, we missed so many great indie games, like that. It's just so hard to try and keep on top of everything that you just...
One person cannot play everything.
No.
That's the problem. As much as I try to make that happen, I definitely I play a lot of stuff, and I try to trick myself into thinking I can play every game, and that's why I buy so many fucking video games. But, truly deep down in my heart, it's like my YouTube Watch Later playlist. I know I'm never going to finish it, I know it's never going to end, so I'll try regardless. I'll keep trying. So, yeah. Cool. That's all the emails, right, Bally? We went through a few there, and we got some more, and we'll definitely hit up some more of those. But in the meantime, where can people write in, Bally, to our email address?
Please send your emails to thisnintendolife@gmail.com. That's thisnintendolife@gmail.com. And post comments in our Discord server. Check out that channel. It says emails.
Absolutely. Go there. Have fun. It's good. Cool. Well, we're going to get on out of the show. Thanks everybody for listening. It's been a great time. I hope you like it. I don't know why I'm doing this accent now, but I'm here and I'm going to stay here for a little while. So let's shout out some people for supporting us, because you can support the show, if you didn't know, on a little website called Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/thisnintendolife, you can toss us a couple bucks and get some cool things as a result. And we have a new patron this week, Bally.
Yes, thank you to our new patron, Tyler O. Thank you very much for your patronage. But thank you also to all of our $10 tier patrons. I want to thank Zach S, Atari Alex, Thomas, Matthew, and my wife Caroline. Thank you all for your $10 tier support. But thank you to all of our other patrons. It's hugely appreciated, the support you give the show.
Absolutely. Shout out to Tyler, actually, because he used to do stuff with Nintendo World Report, and that's kind of where I followed him from, and kind of, he's been back and forth with me a bit on Twitter, and he's listened to the show and is now supporting, so shout out to him. Thanks so much, Tyler. Also, well, we've got obviously a bunch of stuff coming out still that is not the main show, including our Patreon episodes, but also we're doing spoiler casts all over the place. We have a Metroid Dread spoiler cast that we mentioned at the top of the show in the feed right now. We will also have an Eastward spoiler cast coming out, so if you're interested in that, definitely give that a listen. Bally, it seems like not enough people are doing spoiler casts about Eastward on the internet, so we'll be the first one, I guess.
I cannot find one anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, maybe I can look harder, but yeah, YouTube is completely barren of spoiler casts, so yeah, we might even be the first.
Yeah, well, we got to hit that algorithm, son. Get those people in there. So check those out when they are available. They are hopefully very good. You can also obviously find us all over the place where we do fun things online. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at LordNBZ. Where can they find you, Bally?
I'm on Twitter at Ballyman91. That's BALLYMAN91.
Fandabidozy. You can, of course, find the podcast Twitter at TNL Podcast, and you can go there for updates to all our stuff, as well as links to our Discord, our YouTube channel, and various other accoutrements associated with this Nintendo life. So, yeah, go and check that stuff out. Obviously, you can find us all over the place on the internet. You can download us, find us on Spotify, find us on Stitcher, and all the pod-catching apps that you have. If you have Pocket Cast, if you've got Instacast, whatever app that you so desire to use, Apple Podcasts, we're there, we're available. Download us, subscribe, means you always get those shows, and stuff like the Dread spoiler cast will just be in your feed, and you'll be like, oh, that's fun, I finished that game, I'll listen to that, which I advise you to do, because it was a good conversation. I think that is pretty much it in terms of plugs and things and stuff. Bally, have you got any plans going on anytime soon? Any gaming plans? Any weekends blocked out for anything in particular?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to Moonglow Bay, which is coming
nice.
in like a few days. So that's obviously a fishing kind of sim style game that's got a lot of Stardew Valley vibes that I'm very much looking forward to, and yeah, want to play that.
Nice. Yeah, I am trying to, and I was just telling you about this. Yesterday, I hit my 49th successful win on Hades. It was also my 99th run in Hades. So if I do my next run successfully, I will have done 50 wins in Hades and 100 runs total, which would be a perfect like 50-50 relationship. So I'm kind of sitting on that right now. I don't know if I want to jump straight in and do it straight away, because the pressure is high for me to convert this.
Well, now you got to tell everyone next episode what was the result.
Maybe I won't pick it up before next episode. Who knows, Bally? It might just be sitting there for a long time. It's sat on 48 for a long time, and I just jumped in yesterday and did another run and managed to be successful, but who knows how it will go.
It's really good your skills haven't atrophied. Like, to go in there and actually get a win is very impressive.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Hades is like my fucking second name at this point. That's how much I've played it. So I still love that game dearly. It's fucking incredible. So go play Hades if you haven't. But yeah, that's going to do us for this week. Thanks everybody for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with some more video game chat, some more discussion, some more Nintendo stuff. Until then, thanks for listening, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye, folks. The musical interlude used on today's show was Saka no Machi from Eastward. Copyright Pixpill and Chucklefish 2021.